welcome to Pearl Perspectives. I'm Allie.
I'm Karen.
And I'm Anaï.
And today we're coming at you with another Purls of Wisdom roundtable episode, where today we'll be talking about something along the lines of pattern hacking, pattern modifying, and the always contentious pattern resharing. So today Karen will be our moderator. And so, why don't you start us off with our first little question?
All right. So, first question, pretty easy to start. So, do you modify patterns? How often? And for what reason?
I do modify patterns. I modify patterns all the time. Mm-hmm. In fact, I modify patterns accidentally because I'm not very good at following instructions, which is crazy to say as a knitter, but I'm not. Sometimes I feel like I know what I like to do. I know what I enjoy making and what styles of shaping and color work I like to do. And so I make modifications very often based on my own enjoyment or based on what I know has worked well for me in the past. The easiest is I shorten or lengthen the lengths of bodies and sleeves. Sometimes when I want a tighter fit, I will ignore the recommendations for ease that the pattern says and just add on as many stitches as I need for the right fit around the arms, etc. And I like to modify textures. If I'm not enjoying the texture, I'll just, I won't do that.
Nice.
And I've also kind of mixed and matched. So I've done some parts of one garment and parts of other garment, or I've used the construction of one sock but with the design texture of another sock. I'm just I love Frankenstein stuff, and I feel comfortable with it because I do it for fun.
Yep.
I will say, however, I do not document those modifications.
I do.
So on the other side.
So I also modify my patterns or my projects quite a bit, predominantly more for fit than anything else, as has been already established on the pod. I'm a Dorito. My body is shaped like this.
A sexy Dorito.
A sexy Dorito.
But still a Dorito.
But yeah, so I am very much a pear-shaped human, and as a result, I'm actually in a shirt that I modified myself while making it to create a more A-line silhouette. Now, this is something that I do almost with every sweater I knit. I have to give it A-line shaping because what I have seen is that the vast majority of patterns are designed to have the body of a sweater be a tube, right? Very little shaping. Sometimes you'll see that they'll have bust darts. I am not a person that requires bust darts. I can typically fit into, for lack of a better term, like off the rack sizing. So in that case, I don't need them, but I do need that A-line shaping because my bust to waist to hip ratio is like very much hourglassy.
Yeah.
So I'll typically do a lot of like A-line shaping right after I join in the arms. I'll do a steady amount of increases down the side, and that's where I'll do all of my modifications.
Did you do that for this garment that you're wearing?
I did. So let me see if you can see
I see them. I see them.
You see them? Okay, cool.
Yeah,
you have some really strategic A-line
I
increases.
do. And I write about them. I put them all in Ravelry on my project page for everything that I modify.
Okay. Do you do that because you want to remember what you did, or because you want other people to benefit from it?
A bit of both. I firmly believe that in order to make knitting as accessible as possible, that like any information that I can glean to make somebody else's time easier, I'll share it. And I already, like as a person, as a professional, I'm all about documentation anyway. So for me to write those steps down is not a hardship for me. Like it's just normal for me to do that. And on top of that, I always try to write it in a way where I'm not giving away the pattern. Like I'll phrase it in a way where if you have the pattern in front of you, you can see seamlessly where it slots in. But I also want to write it in such a way that if you're not looking at the pattern, but you're reading my modifications, that it could become hopefully easy inspiration for you to do those similar modifications in a different pattern. right? So
Yeah.
I like to be like, oh, I've put in A-line shaping 1 inch below the sleeve separation and then a 2nd inch below the sleeve separation. And I do 2 increases here and I do them this far apart from the side line, like the median line, whatever you want to call it. And that's typically my
it
main
helps,
garment modification.
Yeah, it helps to make sure that people don't just...
Yeah. On top of that, same as you, I do like to lengthen things, shorten sleeves. Sometimes I'll pick up fewer stitches for a collar so I have a tighter neck. Like little kind of more aesthetic modifications than anything.
Yeah.
And I am also a big fan of taking a pattern that is written to be top-down socks and being like, no. Sorry, toe-up socks and being like, nope, and flipping them to be
cuff down.
Cuff down, yeah. So, as ever, I have examples of patterns that I've modded because I do nothing without resources. And so, for example, this is a pair of socks that I modified. The pattern was written to be toe up. So you start here and you work down and you do this. And I thought, no. So I took the pattern. I literally just like read it in reverse. I took the chart that came with this and flipped it over and was like, okay, there we go. And
but the texture is a wave. So
the texture is a wave.
It doesn't really matter if it's going up or down. It's
exactly. So it's just one of those things that now that I've made almost 60 pairs of socks, I feel comfortable doing those modifications without having to think about them or like find an alternative, because I also don't like I have a specific heel shape that I like, a specific toe shape that I like. I know what numbers I personally require when I'm knitting a sock. So I can very easily take a pattern that's written in a different way and just apply it to my standard formula. And then I have a knitting experience that is not as cerebral as if I was doing the pattern completely as written, because I don't have to keep referencing back to it. So part of the reason why I like to modify is for my own ease of knitting.
Have you ever, and I know that for me that's true, sometimes I want to knit a pattern that I'm at the edge of the
pattern size
for, and I just add a couple extra increases, right? Or a really good example that comes to my mind is I tried to make the Holiday Slipover by Petite Knit, I kid you not, probably 4 times because I kept trying to use a yarn that was bigger than the gauge was suggested, and I was just like so sold on having this yarn work. Sorry, Bilbo is scratching at something in the background, so there's a little bit of anyway, I was really set on using this super cool galaxy colored yarn that I had that was bulky, and I thought, well, like the combination of the mohair with this other thing is going to give me the same gauge. It did not, and so I kept redoing the math for the Holiday Slipover over and over and over again with trial and error until I got a fit that I liked. Yeah. In the end, I ended up having a very nice vest, which, by the way, I then undid and did something else. But in a nutshell, I had to modify the pattern, and not only modify it, but like redesign the pattern because I was so set on using a different size, weight of yarn. And that's not really what the pattern, that's not really what the designer intended. The fabric was completely different from what the designer had intended. The fit of the thing was, a lot more structure. It was more bulky, different. It was just a different garment altogether than what the pictures of the Holiday Slipover said. But I still feel like I have to call it the Holiday Slipover, even though I redid all the math, because I used the construction that the designer had set out, even if I had to redo the entire stitch count.
I did something similar to that. I knit the Rhoda sleeveless vest by Irene Lim for my sister. The pattern, I think, is originally written in a sport weight cotton, and I used a DK weight wool acrylic blend because that was what I had in stash, and that was what my sister requested. The pattern also wasn't size inclusive, so I did have to do a little bit more math to make sure that at the gauge that I was working in the DK weight, that I would actually be able to create a vest that fit her. And again, the pattern wasn't size inclusive, so that was part of it. But it was really funny because I ended up using the numbers of like the largest size available in the pattern to make the measurements of like one of the middle sizes. And same thing, I had to do a whole bunch of extra repeats of the pattern to like get the right length and everything like that. And at the end of the day, I was like, it's obviously still this vest, but it feels like I put in way more work than I anticipated and had to basically not redo a lot of the math, but I had to do a lot of extra math in order to make it work. So
let's assess what we've got going on here in terms of modern patterns, first of all. Because I feel like we're talking about modifying patterns in the light of modification being done by some makers out there, and then that coming off as negative or offensive or, you know, like bordering or inching towards intellectual property, like
infringement,
right? And I want us to analyze how pattern writing has changed over the years. If you've ever had the pleasure of browsing through the art of knitting from 1892 or 1852, there's a PDF collection of vintage knitting patterns that is currently hosted by the Smithsonian website, and you can see how patterns were written there for people of that time to knit. The amount of assumptions that the designers made is incredible. First of all, they don't give you gauge.
Nope.
They barely ever give you stitch counts. There's only ever one size. And a lot of the patterns are written not in rows and rounds, they're written narratively. So they'll tell you things like, cast on enough stitches to go across your shoulders, and then work plain increasing evenly until you reach a certain point, right? And so you have to do the math. The designers assume that you're a good enough maker, that you know what it is to knit plain, you know what it is to increase evenly, and you know what it is to reach a certain length. And they trust you to choose the correct needles and size of yarn. And all of the patterns are like that. They are maybe a couple paragraphs long. That's what you would find in every magazine that was coming out. That's what they published in the newspaper. Right? And along the way, we have gotten more needle options, more yarn options, and fashion has changed. But after that, there wasn't that big of a switch, like in between to where we are today. And I'd like us to think about fisherman sweaters and Gansey sweaters. If you think about the construction of a Gansey sweater, they give you the chart for the yoke, the texture that was pretty specific to the area where the people lived, or to the family that was making these sweaters, or to
they were hyper regional.
They were hyper regional charts for the textured yoke of a Gansey or a fisherman sweater. And so all you had to do, because there were no size-ins or like patterns printed for different people's circumference of chest, you would take the main pattern, and if you wanted it to be smaller, you would take a few rows out. And if you wanted it to be bigger, you would add a pattern repeat. Or you would add another stripe of cables that are 8x8 because you know that cables look good. So you would add a cable on each side so that it would fit wider. And then you didn't even have to measure around, because you just did the yoke and then picked up the stitches and went stocking it all the way down. And somewhere, as we kept going along in our descriptions of patterns, we've reached a point in which I, the modern maker, I'm very spoiled. And I get aggravated when the pattern doesn't give me a little abbreviation box with all of the abbreviations that they're using. And I consider a pattern not good enough when they give me narrative, like, not that I don't consider it, but I get like a little negative feeling in my body when I'm like, well, I didn't explain this with more detail? Why didn't they explain this with more detail?
Yeah.
When I know I am a good enough knitter, I could figure it out. But I now attach the purchase of a pattern as an investment of convenience.
Yeah.
I'm paying so that I don't have to do the math. I'm paying so that somebody else has already figured out what size is going to fit me, and I just have to follow the instructions. Otherwise, I would rather not pay.
So
How do you feel about that?
similar, but also I've had Bilbo's doing something over there.
He's going after ketchup.
Hold on, dog paws.
And
We're back.
on dog paws.
On pause.
He'd gotten himself a little ketchup packet,
Yeah.
which is
You
not
were
good.
saying.
So I was saying, kind of following this line of thought of yours where it's just like you want the convenience. So I have noticed a trend in North American pattern designers, to some degree British pattern designers, being a lot more effusive in their language. Like they put more steps in, they have more information there for you to follow minutely, like step by step by step. Whereas a lot of Scandinavian and, well, I've only really knit from Scandinavian designers, British and North American, so I'll stop there.
European.
So a lot of Scandinavian designers will have much more brevity in their patterns. They'll be a lot shorter, a lot more concise. And at first, I was really annoyed by this. I knit I think it's called the Bernadette sweater by Fable Knitwear. I did a craft exchange with my friend. I knit her the sweater. She handmade me a pair of stays. Beautiful. I love them. Thank you, Natasha. While I was knitting this sweater, I was so frustrated at every single step because the information was so brief, so short, that it was just like, increase the short rows till this depth. And I was like, well, where do I start them? And then I get to the point where I'm going to do the sleeves, and they have these beautiful, big, voluminous sleeves. And she goes, increase until you've hit this many stitches. And I'm like,
But what kind of increase?
but what kind of increase?
Which
How many
one?
per row? Like, how many rows? Like, what
ratio?
What is the depth? Like, where am I supposed to go? Do I need to change to a larger needle size to accommodate that big volume? I don't know. And I was getting so frustrated during the making of it that I actually went into a bunch of like Ravelry forums and the comment section on the pattern page just to kind of see if anybody else was being as frustrated, because I was and this is the key here. I've been knitting for over 15 years, and I was at a point where I was feeling dumb, where I was feeling like I was incapable of making this thing. That's what the pattern was making me feel like. I don't want to shade the designer. That's not what this is for. We're getting to the point. But I got into the Ravelry forums, and I was just looking around, trying to see if I could get some help and some clarification. And I came to realize that it wasn't a pattern problem. It's a cultural difference.
It's
because
a context difference.
It's
Context problem.
because what's happening here is in a lot of Scandinavian countries, people are taught to knit in elementary school from a very young age. So by the time they get to adulthood, they've been knitting for decades, and they have that inherent knowledge that you were speaking of earlier of like, oh, you want me to increase to make a huge voluminous sleeve?
I'll just pick an increase style that I know I like.
Exactly. I'll do a rapid increase over 4 rows, and boom, I've hit the stitch count, and I've got that big poof, right? I didn't know that because I only started knitting when I was 18, but still, when I started knitting, it was with these patterns that are predominantly North American in style that are very much like an instruction booklet,
Manual,
a step by step thing. And so I came to realize that, I want to pay for the convenience and I want those step-by-step instructions, but I can't be sitting there blaming a designer for writing a pattern in a style that they are familiar with. I either need to, A, get familiar with that pattern style and, have more confidence in myself, or B, just buy patterns from designers whose writing style reflects my knitting style.
Yeah.
Right?
Or
and there's
your
no
need.
or my need.
In terms of like pattern,
There's no shade to Scandinavian designers. They make the most beautiful patterns. I have seen some incredible work out of well-known and less well-known designers of Scandinavian origin, but it just had to become a paradigm shift in terms of how I was approaching them.
Yeah.
So in later projects by Scandinavian designers that were more brief in their writing, I walked into it and was like, okay,
I'm going to need to make some decisions.
let's get creative.
Yeah. Now, the question of design a pattern really comes front and center in these kinds of not ambiguous but high context or high assumption patterns in which the designer purposely left some things out and for you, the maker, to make some choices. So if you choose to deviate from that, or if you choose to use more increases, fewer increases, a different style of I don't know, construction, and still follow the general vibe of the pattern, I consider that to be a small enough modification that I can still call the finished object that the designer had presented and that I paid for.
I mean, some of this is also just the fact that, like, your first point where you're talking about older patterns being, which is the same as Scandinavian patterns. It comes to the fact that back in the 50s, 60s, whatever, like my grandmothers both knit. They knit since they were like 5-6 years old, right? They started super young. So it's the same principle as, so for them, like you said, it's inherent. This is what, and I feel like here, it's not necessarily that we're spoiled. Well, yes, a little bit, but it's also that we are so, the best parallel I can make is, I know it's going to sound weird for some people, but you know how sometimes you have a tool to take over, like when you write a letter or an email or whatever, and you have your tool looking at the spelling.
Yeah.
So there are softwares, like
check.
Antidote is a good example. So people rely on it to the point where they don't really think about how they're going to write the letter or whatever. They just, Antidote will take care of it, right? So it's the same thing where you kind of like depend so much on it that you don't think about your own cognitive abilities or your own ability to do this and not have to depend on these things. So I feel like there's a little bit of both where, yes, it is definitely a bit of a shift. Like our generation doesn't knit as much as our grandparents did, for sure.
It's coming back though.
But it is coming back, and I hope it stays.
Do you think it's a problem of confidence that because we don't need that much, we are dependent on heavily spelled out instructions?
Not necessarily. I feel like it's more a problem of confidence because we are essentially given a yellow brick road map to the ending product. So we never have to think for ourselves.
And it's not just in knitting. Like there's so many other things in life, especially within North American society, where we are spoon-fed information step by step by step. Like we become so accustomed to receiving information in this one specific way that when we are then faced with an alternative method of information delivery, people just freeze up and they don't know what to do.
And I think that freezing up, that aversion to making changes to the information that you've received is also making us have these negative feelings against modifying patterns to your liking. Like, you know, I personally don't see anything wrong with buying a pattern or taking a free pattern and making any changes to it that I want. Because in the end, I'm the one who's making this. I have to enjoy it. And I'm the one who's going to wear it, so it has to fit me. And if the pattern's not giving me, giving me that result, then I feel free enough and confident enough to make whatever changes I want. But in an era in which, like you said, everything is being spoon-fed to us, everything has like a lot of instructions, there is this hesitance to deviate from the path.
Which is sad a little bit, because when you think about it, we're also probably one of the first, well, not us generally, but like these generations are the first who have like so much information out there. It's not like you need to look for it really far. You can just Google it, and chances are whatever you think you need to know is going to be available to you. So we have a gold mine of information, and yet we still want the pattern to be right in front of us and have the whole thing from A to Z.
We do have a gold mine of information, but I think high abundance of information has made us individually worse researchers.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
I would also like to say that I have noticed so many new makers be terrified of making mistakes. And then as soon as they make a mistake, choosing to stop, rip it out, or stop entirely instead of trying to learn and adjust on the go. Right? Like, as another example, this is the Velacore tee by Andrea Mowry. It's just like a big box, right? So this is the back. Now, when you divide, you start at the bottom. I'm just going to lay it out. You start at the bottom and you get up to about here and then you split for front and back. And you're supposed to have the same number of stitches in the front and back. I miscounted. And I have 20 more stitches in the front than I do in the back.
That's kind of lucky.
I didn't realize it until I had knit both of them and was starting to seam at the top. So like all of the knitting was done. And that was when I realized I made the mistake. Now at first I was like, oh no, this sucks. This is terrible. And somebody at Knit Night said to me, oh, well, just pull it out. Like it's fine. You can redo them, which is a valid option. But I, being the perpetually lazy human that I am, was like, screw it.
Full of spite.
You know what? Let's just see what happens. And so I seamed the shoulders, and now you can kind of see here there's a bit of a dip in the front.
Yeah.
But this turned out to be such a good thing because I have about 20 extra stitches in the front. I now actually have inadvertently added bust shaping to a box-shaped sweater.
And it fits you really
well. And it fits me so good. Now, if I had made that mistake and decided I didn't want to keep the mistake, ripped it all out, and knit it again and did it properly, I would have ended up with a garment that didn't actually fit me all that well, was one I probably didn't reach for all that often, and I wouldn't have learned anything. But in choosing to forge ahead with this mistake and just soldiering on and then seeing what happened, I learned a new thing that is now going to become very much important to when I modify bottom-up boxy sweaters. I'm going to make sure that I have extra stitches in the front of the garment
to accommodate your curves.
Yeah.
To accommodate not just my chest, but I have an apron belly as well. And so having those extra stitches forward facing in the garment means that I now have space for the parts of my body that are a little bit further away from like that median line of my body up the side.
Yeah.
And as a result, I end up, we've lost our camera.
Second interruption.
Part
complete.
3. Again, it's really not a Pearl Perspectives episode if there isn't some kind of tech failure along the way.
Yeah.
We had a camera die.
Or a dog interruption.
I think now it's going to be expected.
Yeah. So you were saying.
So I was saying, if I had not, or at least I think this is where I was, if I had not carried on after I realized my mistake, if I had ripped it out, started again, and just corrected it, I would have ended up with a garment that didn't fit me very well, and no lesson learned. In carrying on with this mistake, in carrying on with this accidental modification, I have learned a crucial fit understanding when it comes to boxy shaped garments for my body type. I am very forward heavy. I have a chest and I have an apron belly, and having those extra stitches that are on the forward part of the garment as opposed to the back, I now have a garment that fits my body and doesn't tug and pull and tuck in ways that are just uncomfortable to wear. And so now in the future, I'm more likely to wear a boxy shaped garment or to knit a boxy shaped garment, knowing full well that I will modify it to transfer some of those stitches to the front of the garment, that will be part of the plan from the beginning. And those are the kinds of modifications that, 100% it was a mistake, it was accidental, but it was crucial to my future knitting goals and plans. And I have now an expanded array of options for what I could make in the future. And that's really exciting. And it's having those little adventures and mistakes that is really important to learn new things. Because as I said, I've been doing this for 15 years, but there's always more to learn.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I don't think you ever stop learning. No. Even if when you consider yourself an expert or...
I also made this longer. That was another intentional modification. I lengthened the body and I lengthened the sleeve, like how much of the top you knit before you...
That's the length of the garment is pretty much the only modification I do, mostly because I'm in the camps of I'm terrified of modifying, which I'm sure I have all the knowledge to do it. I just don't do it as much as, like, the only thing I've ever modified other than length is this guy. This was like very tight and I modified it a little bit to make it like not that much different, just a little like
you did
wider.
A different cast off, or
no, I just added more stitches at the top. And then the other one was a sweater I knit for somebody else that was, I figured they kind of like sit between two sizes. So I kind of went, and the only modification was using some of the parts. I would use the stitch count for the small or medium or whatever. And then for the other one, it was,
switch back
I'd switch back.
I would say that's that's a modification that I've done too. Yeah. And I still count it as a modification.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's good. Then I know
you have a
little bit going. I don't have a lot going. Okay. Let's keep going here. Because I think we're in that same vibe. We have, what would you consider a modification or hack that like crosses a line or goes like, this is like, and by crossing a line, we mean like,
it's no longer the same.
It's no longer, well, I mean, more along the lines of, is this something that the designer would be, yeah, like you wouldn't be able to
that anymore.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to call it the name of
the
designer or
That's a good question, and I think I'm going back to that like reticence we have for IP theft.
Yeah,
I think because I can't remember. I can't remember a point in history in which we started attributing individual patterns to designers. Like, it's different. For example, do you remember Barbara Walker wrote that book, Knitting from the Top, in the 70s or 60s, I think. And before her, nobody had put together a list of instructions or a recipe or a method for knitting sweaters seamlessly from the top. She was the first to publish that. She was like, not that nobody had done it, but she was the first one to put it together in a book and publish that book under her name.
Yeah.
So all or most of the sweater patterns that we have today use Barbara Walker's method of knitting from the top. If I were making a sweater and I decided to, instead of knitting it from the top, if I were knitting a sweater from her book and I decided that instead of doing that, I just want to do the body from the top and I'm going to add the sleeves separately by picking up.
Yeah.
That's the point where I draw the line and I'm saying, like, it's no longer using Barbara Walker's method.
Yeah.
But that's not a specific pattern. It's a method. It's a method that she developed. And if I deviate crucially from it, it's going to give me a different result. And I can no longer call it a Barbara Walker inspired top-down sweater.
Yeah.
But, like, socks?
But where, but
I feel that way about socks.
Socks?
I don't, like, if I knit a vanilla sock that doesn't have any textural pattern or color work on it, I don't, like, when I put it in Ravelry, I don't attribute it to a specific pattern.
It's not a pattern.
It's not because pattern. It's a recipe at that point where, like, I have tried so many different cuffs. I have tried so many different heels. I have tried so many different toes. I know the measurements I like in terms of length of leg, length of foot. And I'm now at the point in my knitting journey where I can take these different components and I can stick them together and I can create a sock that fits me but isn't attributed to a single pattern. But at the same time, you know, twisted rib is going to be the same whatever pattern says do twisted rib. A heel flap and gusset with a slip stitch heel, that's going to be the same in whatever pattern you say it's going to be, because there's really so few ways to do a slip stitch heel, so few ways to do a twisted rib. I'm always going to do a wedge toe. And again, there's only so many different ways you can do a wedge toe, not many. So at that point, why would I write down the name of somebody else when I'm probably going to be changing what they write anyway?
In a way, I think, at least for your sock journey, it sounds like you are essentially in that, like, 1950s, I know what I'm doing era.
Which
is a little bit.
Can you say, like, this is just a thought here, but would you say in a way that what you're talking about where we tend to, like, be overly obsessed with the individual pattern, that this could also be attributed a little bit to the individualism that comes with social media and like, because if you look at back in the day or not necessarily back in the day, but kind of a little bit, like, it was more like knitting has always been more of a pass down from you know, mom to daughter or like adult to child. It's been more of a, like, let me show you how to do the techniques, and then you do your own thing and you don't necessarily follow 50,000 patterns, versus today where everybody kind of, like, wants to just have their name out there a little bit, I feel. And it's easy to just, like, fall in that trend of...
I think you've hit the nail on the head right there. Historically, it was techniques that were passed on and that were shared. It wasn't individual patterns. And now we're at a point in society where that's what you are passing on. You are sharing the pattern in full and not the individual components of it.
So in a way, the Scandinavian method is a little closer to like that tradition of let me just show you the techniques and then you roll with it.
Yeah.
Right? Which I feel like has a lot of... I get wanting to follow a pattern from A to Z because I feel like it's comforting. I don't have to think. I don't have to look anywhere. But at the same time, we do have all the tools to be able to handle a pattern like the old-fashioned patterns where you have a lot less direction.
Yeah.
You can still do it. It's just that it's not... You have to do more work.
I do want to add a little extra thought to this, like what crosses a line in terms of modifying a pattern. Mm-hmm. And if we think about food as a parallel, right? The other day, not the other day, a couple years ago.
So the other day, no.
A day that was not today.
Because
a couple of years ago, my friend, who is Quebecois, was staying with me for a few days, and she was like, let me make you dinner. I saw this recipe for tortilla soup, and I think it's going to be delicious. And she followed the recipe that she found on a blog online, and it ended up being a really good soup. Was it tortilla soup? No, it was not. And it made me incredibly upset. It wasn't her fault, first of all.
Yeah.
She just sought the keywords, found a recipe, and followed the instructions to the T. And she presented it to me with all the love in her heart, as in like a comforting act of service that I received very well. What really had me hung up on it was that this recipe for tortilla soup, which is a traditional Mexican dish, and I'm Mexican, was written by a white lady in the US, and she had put it up in a blog with ads that she was profiting from.
Cultural appropriation.
And that, my friends, crosses the goddamn line.
Yep.
Yeah, 'cause she's profiting.
She didn't steal a recipe from anywhere. It's a traditional technique.
Yeah.
Everybody has a slightly different recipe for their own tortilla soup. But this lady had put so many incorrect, in my opinion, ingredients in that recipe that she had made her own. She made too many modifications. And she didn't stop there. She didn't just make it for her family, had a nice meal, took a picture and popped it on Instagram. No, she went extra. She documented that. She formatted it, put it in a blog, and is currently still profiting from the ad revenue of that blog post. And a lot of people out there are making that, excuse my language, goddamn tortilla soup that is fake.
It's a tortilla soup.
I mean, at this point,
perpetuating that.
At this point, she could have just made her own, like...
She could have called it
her own
yummy chicken tomato soup.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have been angry. Now, why do I tell this story? It's because profit is where I draw the line.
Yeah.
Knitting is a tradition. It's passed down through generations. Techniques are passed down through generation. Nobody owns the techniques. Nobody owns stitch patterns or stitch motifs. Right? Once it's out in the world, it's out in the world. Anybody can do it. But where I think we need to make a really clear line hard line in the sand is if a person is making a living out of putting together combinations of these techniques into a product, in this case a printed or downloadable pattern, they deserve to be compensated for their time. And if I, as a consumer, take that pattern that I paid for, change half of the ingredients, rebrand it, and republish it on my blog for a profit, and I call it the same name,
or close enough that you can kind of tell what it's associated with.
Absolutely not. That is their property. They worked for it. They had the techniques just like I did, but I didn't do the work. They did the work.
Which is interesting because I have seen on the Craft Snark Reddit over the last little bit, people have been like, hey, this person totally just like copied my pattern. And like, yes, sure, it might be for short rows in the neck of a sweater or like the cuff or whatever, but while the technique is something that everybody uses, the way that it was written was copied word for word, lifted, and put into a different pattern. And so the argument that was presented in some of these posts that I've seen is like, yeah, but like everybody writes a heel, like everybody uses a slip stitch heel, or everybody uses short rows at the back of the neck to lift the neck of a sweater.
Okay, and but if you're using the same language,
but that's the thing. It's like, where is that?
That's a copy paste thing.
Like, but that's what it was. It was the verbiage. Because it was copied word for word.
That's
that became the line that was crossed versus we're just using the same technique in the same way.
Yeah.
So
now, like, I want to add another little thing. Like, if any of you out there are software developers or use code in any way, you will know that the best way to build code from scratch is to Google existing codes, mixing and matching and copy pasting until you have a Frankenstein of what you want. Why? Because it's inefficient to write it from scratch, right? So I agree. If I'm making my own sweater pattern, why would I start from scratch if I know that there are some proportions or structures from other publications that I can mix and match and take from and, build my own? Where is the line, though?
But I feel like most... I want to think that most people who do this sort of thing, where they create their own designs and use techniques that have already been... know the difference between taking a little bit from what I would consider techniques and yeah, I guess.
No, you say that. There is...
I wouldn't know where the line is.
That's the thing. It's hard to tell what is too much.
It's not a clear distinction. Like, it's blurry. Where is the line?
But it can be clear, though. So there is a very popular sock heel pattern called the Fish Lips Kiss heel. Oh, yeah. It is a short row afterthought heel that is beloved by the knitting world.
I love it.
And a lot of designers, when writing socks and choosing to include that heel, will, at the point of the heel, be like, and now put in the Fish Lips Kiss heel, and then link to the pattern. I think it's like $2 on Ravelry or something. And then let people go purchase the pattern, knit the heel, and then come back, and then they finish the rest of the...
And if I bought the socks pattern, I don't want it, I don't have to, I can just insert a different heel.
Exactly. But however, I'm not done yet. However, there are patterns out there where I have purchased them, opened them, started knitting them, and realized that they have literally taken the instructions for the Fish Lips Kiss heel, plopped it into the pattern without calling it that, and have carried on.
They don't even mention it.
They just say heel, short row afterthought heel.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, that's what. To me, at the very least, you should acknowledge the designer, and then. Like, I mean, if it's a free pattern, I get it. You don't, but if it's not a free pattern, then link to, like, that would be the ideal way to do it.
But that is, I think a lot of people are like, well, I bought the pattern, therefore I should be able to use it in my pattern.
No, that's just being a...
Well, I mean, when it comes to intellectual property, there is such a thing as paying for licensing, right? So if you buy someone else's intellectual property for your own use... You just pay it at the commercial rate. But if you want to buy it to use it for a service or a product that you're going to profit from, then you need to pay the licensing rate to use that intellectual property. And that's true for music, for service procedures, code, etc. Even for some like graphic design elements, right? You pay the the licensing fee to use it, and then it's fair game. Unless that product or that piece of intellectual property has been specifically designed to be Creative Commons. In which case...
Free for all.
Free for all, right? I have a little bit of an unsettling feeling with the Fish Lips heel... Because it's exactly the same as the short row heel. That's just called the peasant heel or the afterthought heel. Not exactly the same though. It has like some key little differences, like an extra stitch here, an extra stitch there, and that's what makes the Fish Lips special. If I were to just make an afterthought no pattern sock, I would probably use that short row heel in which you divide for half of them, short row all the way until you have 20, pick them up on the way down, you got a heel, right? But I wouldn't be able to call that the fish lips kiss.
I think well, again, it's really hard to draw the line, but maybe the line in a way can be drawn where if you know where it comes from, it's not a technique, it's a specific pattern or person, then like acknowledge where it comes from. But if it is a technique and not so much like something that was attributed for one person or was modified for one particular pattern, then, you know, like...
And for the record, I would just like to state that, one, we are not copyright lawyers or intellectual property lawyers.
This is just our opinion.
This is just our opinion.
And number two, we're not like professional pattern designers. Like, we're not designing things and putting them on the internet to sell them. That is not a perspective that we have. And so if we are incorrect about any of this, let us know. Right? Correct us where we're wrong.
I think for me, I have a lot of friends who are, who do some kind of craft, whether it's knitting, but I have friends who do a lot of jewelry making, or who do drawing or painting. And the amount of work that goes into doing this, to me, is what justifies how much I would pay for it, even if they're friends, right? So that's the way I would approach a pattern, even if it's not a garment, just the written pattern. It's still a lot of work to come up with that. So,
and to do it well to the standards of the current
right
market.
So if somebody's like, I need, like, I want, like, I'm profiting from, or I want to live off of this, or I want, like, this is something that I want to profit from, then, like, I have no problem paying for it, because I understand as a crafter the amount of work that goes into this, and because, again, we're paying for the convenience of not having to do it ourselves. So to me, it's almost like, why would I not want to pay for this? Why would I not?
Okay, I have example's not the right word, case study maybe to put towards both of you.
Yeah.
So in 2023, the Stephen West Mystery Knit Along shawl, the first clue was released, and there was a bit of a firestorm.
Oh, I remember that.
As some of you may recall, about the imagery that was seen
was too close to
a very negatively political image.
Yeah.
Rightly so, was pulled. The way Stephen West handled the whole thing,
very gracious.
We're very much on team Stephen West here. However, as a community building act, a lot of people made modifications to that first clue at the individual level, either rejigging the pattern halfway through, or starting from scratch and creating their own center of the shawl.
Entirely different that ended up with the same amount of stitches.
Exactly. So that was what I did. I started from scratch a very different design for the center part of the shawl than what the designer had intended, because by the time I joined in, he had pulled the original pattern but hadn't... I can't remember if he had released an alternative, but he hadn't pulled the original pattern yet, which he did ultimately end up doing. So I created my own center, and I wrote out the instructions for that center, and I posted them all on my Ravelry page, being like, this is not tested. I am not a designer. This is just what I did. And I posted all of that there.
I used it. It was great.
For free, just as like a part of the community building thing. Now, if I ever decided I wanted to make a shawl and design a shawl that had that as the center part of it, I could pull that part down from my pattern page, and I could use it as the base of my new shawl and write a pattern around it. And I would feel like I could do that and I could profit off that because I created it, even if it was a huge modification for a pattern I had paid for.
Yeah.
Now, if I were to do that and then use all of the same numbers of the Stephen West shawl and create in the same kind of format and construction, that would be a line too far. I would not cross that line.
And I think it's only a line to cross if you make it, repackage it, and sell it for a profit.
Yeah.
If you're taking patterns from other designers, from publications, from magazines, from history books, you're allowed to do with your knitting what you want.
If it's for your own your own use, 100%.
What we really shouldn't be doing is stealing concepts, ideas, constructions, and other people's intellectual property, repackaging it, and pretending that it was our idea all along and making a profit out of it.
Yeah.
I think that's the root of the root of the issue right here. It's not that it's bad to modify a pattern.
Nope.
It's just that we shouldn't be using that as an opportunity to profit off of other people's work.
We live in a capitalist hellscape. You don't have to fall for the capitalist traps.
So what would be a warning sign of like this pattern is clearly like somebody else's work or something? Like what would be something that would tip you off?
So I really like to read the comments on a pattern before I purchase it. I like to see other people's project pages because from there you can usually get an idea in terms of like how the pattern is written, what kind of information is there or isn't there. And more often than not, if it is one where somebody may have taken a technique or copied verbiage word for word, that shows up pretty quickly. Like that kind of stuff hits Craftsnark on Reddit. That hits Instagram and does the rounds pretty quickly.
And I just want to say thank you to those people who do the work for, because I can't, like, I don't do that. So half the time I'm the last one to know about stuff. Well, I appreciate the research done by others.
I was going to say, I think it's unrealistic to expect that all of us are informed about all patterns of all designers in the world at all times. Yeah. Yes, the information is available to me, but I, as a non-researcher or someone who doesn't have the expertise to do proper research on the internet, I don't have the tools and the skills to know what to look for before paying for a pattern. Because like the contents are not visible to me. Yeah. So the only thing that I can do is do my best at adding an additional step before paying for a pattern. And like you said, make sure I do a quick search of the comments, go on the Instagram page and see if the pictures look like they're from a totally different thing, and use my own good judgment. Now, what happens if I've already bought a pattern that is clearly has been, stolen or Frankenstein word to word, word for word from another designer? I'm not going to beat myself up for it because the consumer is not at fault, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So if you bought a pattern from a problematic designer or a designer whose values don't align with yours at the time of purchase or afterwards, you are not at fault for having fallen for that capitalistic trap. But you now have more information to make future decisions.
Yeah, that's where, for me, that's what it would be. It's like, if I find out that something I purchased is from somebody like that, then I might just never purchase from well, actually I will never purchase from them again. That's usually where I draw the line. But that's just, it depends on the person, I guess. Some people don't care.
And you don't have to make such a definitive
no. And as an aside, I'd just like to add that if you did purchase the pattern and then you did find out after the fact that a pattern designer had maybe stolen IP or was not somebody whose values aligned with your own, and you're like, well, I spent the $9 on that pattern and I really want to make it, you are still allowed to make it.
You can make it.
I would just say, maybe don't, give the designer airtime on your social media. Yeah. Maybe don't put a project page on Ravelry that links to the original pattern. Like, just...
Here's what...
Anyway, that's how I approach these kinds of things personally.
Here's what we're not collectively going to do. And I think we can all agree. What we're not going to do is, after having bought a pattern and discovering that the designer is no longer aligned with your values, or they did something that you deem incorrect or unfair, we're not going to then take that $9 pattern and post it for everyone to download on the internet. We're not going to do that.
Nope.
Oh, is that something that actually happened?
Oh my God. Did you not hear about the Discord?
I don't know what's happening.
The tea, folks. This is a little bit outdated. I think the firestorm really hit.
This tea is pretty tepid.
Yeah. Almost cold. So there was a Discord server that was created some time ago with the sole intent of sharing pattern PDFs.
Paid pattern PDFs.
Oh
my God.
And it hit the fan. I'd say maybe January. I think.
How long had it been up?
It had been up for a while. And there was one designer, I believe it was Helen of Fable Knitwear, who kind of really blew the whistle on this Discord and was like, WTF, my work is being shared on this Discord for free. Pull them all down right now. This is copyright infringement.
Yeah.
They then spread the word. Other designers jumped on the Discord and were like, same thing, pull down my patterns, copyright infringement, take it down. The moderators of the Discord scrambled. I wasn't on the Discord. I didn't know about it until after all of this had happened. So I'm obviously only hearing about it from secondhand. But essentially, there was a movement within the Discord to be like, no, it's fine. It's fine that we're sharing these patterns. Like, I bought it. I can do with it what I want.
But it's not, though.
And sure, if you're going to shut us down, well, we're just going to start a new Discord. So, really bad. Don't do that. Don't do that. Do not do that.
Because the thing is, again, you're taking away from someone's livelihood. Why would you do that? Why, like...
And I understand that, like, oh, this person's like, I consider this person to not be a good person, so I'm going to
it doesn't matter.
harm them by taking business away
like,
from
don't
them.
stoop to their level.
It's not up to me. I made a mistake in a purchase that I'm not going to make again, but that doesn't give me liberty to mess with other people's financials.
if you don't like somebody's values or principles or just you don't mesh with them, just don't give them airtime. Don't think about them. Don't look at them. And eventually, if everybody does that, they'll go away.
And on the flip side...
But you don't need to attack them or, like, take away their livelihood. That's
on the flip side, if it's a pattern or designer whom you love deeply, who you respect greatly, and you want to see their patterns made, also don't give away the pattern for free. Like,
also don't give away the pattern for free.
Give them airtime, talk about them, but don't give the stuff for free.
Yeah. Last fall, someone I know was like, oh, I've seen you've made this very popular pattern several times. Can you send it to me? And I was like, no,
I don't think so.
No, I'm not going to do that. If you want to take a look at my printed copy that I wrote all my notes and modifications on, I'll show that to you. But I'm not going to send you a PDF of this copy because that's not right.
Well, we were talking about this while we were on the bus.
Yeah.
On the way here, and what came up was the parallel of a printed pattern versus a physical book, right?
Yes.
I'm very happy if I have a physical book that I've read that I'm probably not going to read again. I can pass it on to someone else and not feel guilty about that. But the difference is that there's still a single copy of the book that has now changed hands.
Yeah.
That's my right. I believe that is okay. Secondhand goods are a thing, right? But when it comes to a digital pattern, a digital knitting pattern, if I send you the PDF and you send that PDF to someone else,
and they do,
there's now 4 existing copies of the pattern, whereas I paid for it only one time.
Yeah. And that's where, like, 100%, that's where I draw the line. To me, it's like, if you have one physical copy moving around, it's still just one copy moving around. But if you're going for, because, again, it's 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, 6, and then we get to 100 copies that whoever made this pattern is not getting profit from.
And again, we're not pattern designers. We're not IP specialists in any way, shape, or form. So if there are pattern designers out there who are deeply uncomfortable with that behavior, let us know and we'll stop doing it.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah. I would love to hear what your take is on sharing patterns and modifying patterns, whether for your own use or for sale. If you think that is a market that is currently emerging and that we should, try to change our point of view a little bit, I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. Also, just be nice in the chat because we are fragile.
And all this
we have anxiety, okay?
We're also very new to the concept of IP knitting pattern IP. Yeah. Just because we've been knitting for like 800 million years doesn't mean we always know what we're doing.
Okay, maybe you. I'm not not even at 10 years yet.
Yeah, almost there. Anyway, regardless, let us know. This is a journey that we're currently on. We want to be better informed about this. Yes. We want to be better prepared when we introduce people to the knitting world on what the etiquette is, on what way you should be handling this kind of stuff. And we want to make sure that when we are sharing information with the members of our knitting group, new knitters that we're introducing to the craft, or crocheters or makers, whatever, that we're doing so in a way that is good and healthy for the industry at large, as well as the community at a niche level,
and know that
level.
We can still make mistakes. I think that's fair for anybody who's learning, and I think the most important thing is if you do make mistakes, you learn from them and then you move on.
So give us your pearls of wisdom, please.
This has been our pearls of wisdom, and we've been yapping for close to an hour now, so we're gonna let you go. It's been such a pleasure to have another roundtable discussion with you today. We'd love to hear your thoughts and your hot takes about it. And for now, this has been Purls of Wisdom, and we will see you again in another episode with another hot topic about knitting and crochet.
See you later.
Bye.
Thanks for watching.